Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Amaka woke up to the familiar hum of Danfos and Okadas racing through the bustling streets of Lagos, their relentless horns competing with the call of hawkers selling wares by the roadside. She lived in a cramped one-room apartment in Surulere, modest but functional. Its peeling paint and cracked ceiling told stories of nights with power outages and the prayers whispered in the dark. Growing up in a small town outside Enugu, she had dreamed of the metropolis as a place brimming with opportunities. Each day, she rose at dawn, determined to make something of herself and help her aging mother, who remained in the village under the care of neighbors and friends. A gentle, polite young woman of 23, Amaka carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied her humble status. She worked as a sales assistant in a luxury fashion boutique on Victoria Island, a job she had landed by sheer luck after a well-connected acquaintance vouched for her. Among the polished floors and glittering dresses, she often felt like an outsider, but her dedication and sincerity impressed her employer. The fashionable elite strolled in daily, spending fortunes on shoes, handbags, and outfits. Amaka learned to adapt, perfecting her posture, speech, and courtesy to keep up with the demands of high-end clientele. Despite being surrounded by wealth and glamour, Amaka had never compromised her principles. She was raised by her mother to be dignified and honest, traits that glimmered in every aspect of her life. She was also still a virgin. Growing up, she had watched her mother toil relentlessly to raise her and her two siblings after their father's death. She remembered how her mother's gentle voice would remind her, "Your worth is not in material things, my daughter." And so, despite the temptations of Lagos life, Amaka maintained her innocence, focusing on helping her mother and siblings back home. Everything changed on a humid Tuesday afternoon. The boutique's manager asked Amaka to hand-deliver a custom-made suit to one of the most exclusive hotels in Lagos. Apparently, it was for a high-profile client staying there, someone the store considered extremely important. They entrusted the task to Amaka, believing in her impeccable work ethic. She boarded a Kiki tricycle and navigated the congested streets until she arrived at the imposing structure of the Elysium Hotel, a towering edifice with tinted glass that reflected the golden sun. She was directed to the penthouse suite to drop off the suit. Nervously clutching the garment bag, Amaka was ushered by a concierge into an exquisitely decorated foyer. At the end of a marble corridor stood an ornate door. She hesitated briefly, steadied her breath, then lifted her hand to knock. When no one answered, she tried again, but all she heard was the echo of her own uncertain voice. Attempting to leave the package at the reception desk seemed unprofessional, so she decided to wait a little longer. Moments later, she heard a faint noise inside, like something crashing. Concern flashed across her face. Could the occupant be in trouble? Gathering her courage, she gingerly turned the doorknob. To her surprise, it was unlocked. The suite stretched out in opulent splendor before her, with plush carpets, gold accents, and floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed the breathtaking Lagos skyline. On the glass coffee table lay scattered papers and a half-finished glass of juice. Feeling intrusive, she almost retreated, until she noticed a trail of disarray leading down the hallway. Cautiously following the sound, Amaka discovered a man sprawled on the polished marble floor of the master bedroom. His short hair was stylishly cut, and his sharp suit looked expensive, but the sweat beading on his forehead hinted at distress. With a cry, Amaka rushed to his side. She gently patted his cheeks, calling out to him. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing unfocused brown eyes. Fear mingled with concern in her heart. She checked for a pulse. It was there, but he was unresponsive. Noticing fresh blood on the side of his head, she realized he must have collapsed and hid it somewhere. Amaka hurriedly dialed for help, summoning the hotel staff and an ambulance. Hotel security quickly arrived, guiding paramedics into the penthouse. The unconscious man was lifted onto a stretcher. As they struggled to navigate the hallway, One of the paramedics asked for information about his medical history or any known conditions. The staff looked helplessly at one another, none entirely sure who he was or if he had any pre-existing medical issues. In the confusion, they looked at Amaka, who was still holding the garment bag and trembling. Without thinking it through, she replied, "I'm his." She paused, her heart pounding. She was just a delivery girl. What was she doing here? But the medical team was in a rush and needed answers. "I'm his friend," she finally managed, stumbling over her words. That seemed enough to allow them to continue, and they whisked the man away to a waiting ambulance. At the hospital, Amaka felt entirely out of place. Nurses and doctors bustled around the emergency unit, hooking him up to monitors. She was asked to fill out forms. She knew little about him, only that he was a valued client of the boutique. She recalled his name stitched inside the suit jacket, Khalid Emunusa. That was all. When asked how they were related, her response was lost in the swirl of her own confusion. She could see the hospital staff needed urgent details, and someone wrote down her phone number for contact. By evening, Khalid remained unconscious. Amaka, torn between a sense of responsibility and anxiety, waited outside his private ward. She prayed silently, glancing at the beeping machines through the small glass window in the door. A doctor finally emerged with a clipboard. "We suspect a significant trauma to his head. He appears stable now, but the next 24 hours are critical. Are you family?" Amaka's breath caught in her throat. She realized the predicament she was in. If she confessed she was just a sales assistant who found him, there was a chance they might deny her further information and withhold updates. She knew her conscience should dictate honesty, but her empathy overcame her caution. She didn't want him to wake up alone, with no one to reassure him. The doctor, pressing for an answer, repeated, "Miss, are you a relative?" In that instant, spurred by the urgency in the doctor's voice and the swirl of circumstances, Amaka made a decision that would alter her life forever. She nodded, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm his wife." Her heart thundered in her chest as the words left her mouth. The doctor gave her a long, assessing look. Then, accepting her statement, he continued explaining Khalid's condition. Amaka listened, her cheeks burning with shame and uncertainty. She justified her lie, telling herself it was temporary, that once Khalid woke and recovered, she would clear up the confusion. But for now, the hospital staff believed she was Mrs. Khalid Yunusa, and so she was allowed to remain by his bedside. She gently took his hand, her mind racing through the moral implications of the falsehood she had spun. Yet beneath her anxiety, an odd sense of resolve settled over her. She would stay to ensure he was safe. Unbeknownst to her, this single moment of weakness would set the stage for a journey far more complex and dangerous than she ever imagined. Night draped the city of Lagos in flickering neon lights and the constant buzz of late-night commerce. Amaka, seated beside Khalid's hospital bed, felt her palms grow clammy each time she remembered her lie. She had no idea how to explain her presence when Khalid regained consciousness, let alone reveal the truth about herself. Despite her overwhelming guilt, her compassion for the unconscious billionaire kept her rooted to the spot. Something about him, perhaps the vulnerability he displayed or the fact that she discovered him in that vulnerable moment, awakened a protective instinct within her. The ward was quiet except for the gentle beeping of machines. A nurse came in periodically to check Khalid's vitals, always giving Amaka a sympathetic smile before stepping out. By the end of the first night, she could barely keep her eyes open. Against her better judgment, she leaned her head on the edge of the bed and dozed off. When morning broke and sunlight filtered through the windows, she awoke with a jolt to see that Khalid's eyes were open, fixed on her with a quizzical expression. Amaka's heart lurched. She sat up abruptly, straightening her rumpled blouse. "You're awake," she said, her voice tinged with relief. How are you feeling?" Khalid blinked a few times as though trying to recall something. He attempted to speak, but the words came out hoarse. "Water," he whispered, lifting a shaky hand. Quickly, Amaka poured him a glass from the pitcher on the nightstand. He sipped carefully before closing his eyes again. She could see the tension in the cords of his neck as he fought against a fresh wave of dizziness. A few minutes passed before he tried to speak again, this time more coherently. "Where am I?" "This is Mercy Crest Hospital," she replied softly. She mentally rehearsed what she might say if he asked who she was. Much to her dread, he did exactly that. Who are you?" he asked, eyebrows knitting together in confusion. Amaka tensed, anticipating the inevitable question about why she claimed to be his wife. Yet the next words that slipped from his mouth were entirely unexpected. "And who am I?" Her heart sank. Could it be that he had lost his memory? For a moment, she sat frozen, staring at him in shock. She had read about amnesia in novels and seen it in the occasional Nollywood drama, but facing it in real life was far different. She swallowed hard and leaned forward. "Your name is Khalid." "Khalid Yunusa," she said, carefully watching his reaction. Khalid's features remained blank as he tried to piece together some recollection. Amaka noticed panic beginning to flicker in his eyes. "I don't remember," he confessed, his voice strained. "Everything is blank." "How do you know me?" Amaka opened her mouth but struggled with the words. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. If he truly had amnesia, perhaps he wouldn't recall having a wife, or not having one. But lying was still a weight on her conscience. She closed her eyes momentarily, resolving to say as little as possible. She began cautiously, "I'm Amaka?" She stopped short of calling herself his wife. At that moment, a doctor entered. Recognizing Khalid's consciousness, the doctor performed a quick examination, asked a series of questions, and concluded that Khalid was experiencing post-traumatic amnesia, likely temporary. Before leaving, the doctor requested to speak with Amaka outside. Once they were in the corridor, the doctor gave her a grave look. "Mrs. Yunusa, your husband's condition indicates memory loss. It might be short-term, or it could last a while. We'll run further tests, but for now, please keep him calm and avoid overwhelming him with too much information," the doctor advised, glancing down at his notes. "And try to trigger his memories gently. Familiar places, faces, or personal mementos could help." Amaka bit her lip, guilt once again gnawing at her. She nodded silently, wondering how she had gotten herself entangled in this elaborate untruth. Yet the more she thought about it, the more she realized that stepping away now would be akin to abandoning Khalid in his most vulnerable moment. The hospital staff believed she was his wife, and in his current fragile state, Khalid needed someone at his side. She returned to the room, steeling herself for the role she had inadvertently taken on. Khalid lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in thoughts he couldn't untangle. "Hey," she said softly, moving closer. "You should rest." He turned his gaze toward her, eyes clouded with worry. "I feel like I'm swimming through darkness, trying to catch hold of something familiar," he murmured. "But there's nothing." Amaka hesitated. In truth, she knew next to nothing about him. Only that he was wealthy and must be important enough for the boutique to handle him with kid gloves. How was she supposed to help him remember? She glanced around for any personal effects. There was nothing in the hospital room except the clothes he had worn the previous day. The doctor had taken his phone, wallet, and watch for safekeeping, but those items had not provided immediate clues. His phone was locked, the screen requiring a passcode or biometric scan. "Listen, Khalid," she ventured softly, "the doctor said you might recover your memories in time. You just need to heal and not stress yourself too much." He studied her with open curiosity. "And you'll stay with me? You seem to be the only person here I can rely on." A rush of panic and warmth flowed through Amaka simultaneously. She nodded slowly, her conscience protesting. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I'll stay with you." Part of her was alarmed at how easily those words left her lips. Another part was touched by the vulnerability in his eyes. During the next few hours, Khalid dozed in and out of consciousness. Amaka used the time to slip out and call her boss at the boutique, informing them that Khalid Yunusa had been hospitalized. The manager was concerned but insisted she stay as his personal liaison, stating the store's interest in providing any assistance to a valued client. Amaka found it a convenient cover story to remain by Khalid's side, at least until he improved. With each hour that passed, the reality of her new role sank in further. She was an ordinary sales assistant, now masquerading as the billionaire's caretaker, his supposed wife, no less. Amaka's heart pounded when she considered how this charade could unravel if Khalid's real family or associates appeared. How would she explain herself? Would they believe she was taking advantage of a vulnerable man for financial gain? The thought made her stomach twist. Yet, in a corner of her mind, she also felt an odd sense of destiny. This turn of events was bizarre, but it also gave her an opportunity, perhaps not a moral one, but an opportunity nonetheless, to make a difference in a wealthy man's life. If the roles had been reversed, she hoped that someone would have shown her the same compassion. Convincing herself that her intentions were pure, she decided to see this through until Khalid either regained his memory or someone came looking for him. As evening approached, a nurse brought dinner. Khalid still seemed disoriented, picking at his meal. "Amaka," he said quietly, "thank you." She looked up, startled at the sound of her name. He continued, his voice wavering, "Even though I don't remember anything, I appreciate you being here." Her heart squeezed with a mixture of guilt and compassion. She wanted to tell him the truth, that they were strangers, that she owed him nothing. But she simply nodded, mustering a small, reassuring smile. Even if her presence was built on a lie, her concern was genuine. If only she knew how deeply she was about to plunge into a world of secrets, wealth, and power. Exhausted, she found herself drifting off in the bedside chair again. But just before she slipped into slumber, she heard Khalid's faint whisper. "Amaka, what were we like before this? Were we happy?" The question sent a jolt of realization through her. This man fully believed they shared a life together, memories, a home, maybe even a future. Biting down on her lower lip, she swallowed the painful truth. For a second, she grappled with how much to reveal. Finally, she settled on a response as delicate as possible. "We had our fair share of ups and downs," she murmured, "but there was care. We cared about each other." That was not a complete lie. She did care about him, albeit in a complicated, newly formed way. But the rest was an unspoken tangle of half-truths and shame. She closed her eyes, unsettled. Outside, the city roared on, indifferent to her predicament. Little did she know that within days, she would be plunged headlong into Khalid's high-stakes life, forced to navigate intrigues that would test her resolve, expose her to threats she never imagined, and challenge her notion of morality. All the while, she would have to maintain this perilous pretense of being the billionaire's wife, a role she had never asked for and was woefully unprepared to play. When the news of Khalid Yunus's hospitalization leaked to the media, it caused a ripple of mild interest among Lagos's elite circles. Khalid was known for his philanthropic projects, his stake in several booming tech startups, and his flamboyant presence at high-profile events. Yet, for a man of his stature, he had always maintained a certain air of mystery. There were rumors that he hailed from a venerable northern Nigerian family, though no one truly knew the depths of his wealth or the intricacies of his personal life. Amaka remained by his side, torn between the gnawing guilt of her deception and the growing bond she was starting to feel. Each morning, she woke to Khalid asking questions about his life, questions she could scarcely answer. In the solitude of the hospital room, they formed a tenuous companionship. She helped him walk the corridors when the doctors recommended gentle exercise. During those strolls, he would ask the same queries again and again. "Where did we meet? Do I have other family members? Why can't I remember anything?" Amaka deflected as best she could, claiming that his family was away or out of town on business, and that she was the only one immediately available. She weaved half-truths, careful not to overstep into fantastic lies. "Most times," she would say, "we'll sort it out when you're stronger," or "the doctor said not to overload you with too much information all at once." Khalid accepted these vague explanations, partly because he sensed her sincerity, and partly because he had no choice. His own mind was a labyrinth with missing corridors, and he clung to the only lifeline he had, Amaka, the woman who claimed to be part of his forgotten life. However, Lagos, especially the circles that swirl around billionaires, was not easily deceived. One morning, Amaka was startled to find a middle-aged woman in the hallway outside Khalid's private ward. She was stylishly dressed, wearing a gheli that shimmered under the fluorescent hospital lights, and was accompanied by a younger man in a sharp suit. They turned sharply to face Amaka as she approached. Good morning, Amaka ventured, a polite smile plastered on her face. Her heart pounded. She had no idea who these people were, but something about their bearing and the glint in their eyes told her they might be close to Khalid. The woman's narrowed gaze swept over Amaka. I'm Dr. Aisha Yunusa, she said coolly, Khalid's aunt. This is Mr. Hamza, a senior aide from his company. The man next to her offered a stiff nod. Amaka's mind raced. She had feared this day would come, someone from Khalid's actual family or business discovering them. Swallowing her panic, she tried to appear calm and respectful. I'm Amaka. It's nice to meet you, Ma. Aisha's eyes flickered to the closed hospital room door. Where is he? The hospital called me when they couldn't reach him directly. They said there was an accident. And I hear you've been staying with him? Her tone carried suspicion. Amaka stammered, He's inside, resting. He's suffered some memory loss, but he's recovering. Aisha's expression softened marginally at the mention of amnesia. Memory loss? Khalid always was stubborn about his health. I should have been here sooner, but I was in Abuja for a conference. Thank you for looking after him. She paused, pursing her lips. I've never heard of you before, though. Are you one of his new personal assistants? Caught off guard, Amaka's chest constricted. Well, the doctors thought it best not to stress him, so I've been here, as his caregiver, she mumbled, carefully avoiding the term wife. Before Aisha could probe further, the door behind them swung open. Khalid stood in the doorway, leaning on the frame for support, confusion etched onto his features. He looked from Aisha to Hamza, then back at Amaka. Who are you? He asked, directing his question at Aisha. Aisha's face fell. She approached him slowly, her maternal instincts flaring. Khalid, my dear. It's me, Aisha. Your father's younger sister. She gently took his hand, concern evident in her eyes. The doctor told me you might not remember much. Khalid winced as though trying to force a memory. He shook his head, frustration lining his brow. I'm sorry, he said quietly, I really can't recall. Aisha sighed, nodding in understanding. It's okay, my child. We will help you remember. Then her gaze flickered to Amaka, and a question hung unsaid in the air. Sensing her cue, Amaka explained as briefly as possible how she had found Khalid unconscious and stayed to ensure his well-being. She conveniently left out the lie about being his wife, framing it as being a concerned friend. Aisha studied her closely, seemingly detecting the half-truths. But she said nothing, merely instructing Hamza to make arrangements for Khalid's comfortable recovery once he was discharged. There was talk of transferring him to a private facility or even taking him to the family home. Amaka listened nervously, certain that the moment was coming when she would be sidelined. After all, who was she in Khalid's life, truly? Yet, to everyone's surprise, Khalid turned to Amaka, an almost childlike plea in his eyes. Will you stay? He asked softly. I feel safe when you're around. The corridor went silent. Aisha raised an eyebrow. Hamza's lips tightened. Amaka sensed the tension but also glimpsed Khalid's desperation. She was torn between stepping away gracefully and honoring Khalid's request. Before she could speak, Aisha gave a curt nod. If Khalid wants you here, then you may come. But understand that I will have questions for you, Amaka. Later that day, Khalid was deemed stable enough to leave the hospital. An entourage of security and staff arrived. Expensive cars with tinted windows lined the driveway. Amaka almost felt like a stranger in a glamorous Nollywood movie. She rode in a separate SUV alongside Khalid, Aisha, and Hamza. The drive took them out of the hustle and bustle of central Lagos, toward an upscale suburb known for its high walls and gated mansions. As they approached the Yunusa family estate, Amaka found her breath taken away by the opulence. The gates were flanked by armed security. Inside, immaculate lawns stretched out, dotted with exotic plants and water fountains. The mansion itself was a modern architectural marvel. Clean lines, glass walls, and a grand entrance that led to a cavernous foyer. Aisha guided Khalid to his wing of the mansion, leaving Amaka to stand awkwardly by the doorway. She felt dwarfed by the luxury surrounding her: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, avant-garde sculptures. Yet, She also felt invisible under the watchful eyes of household staff who seemed to wonder who she was and why she was there. Her reverie was broken when Aisha approached her, arms folded. "You've done Khalid a great service by staying with him, and I won't forget that," she began, her tone polite but cool. "However, I think you'll understand that we have to protect Khalid's interests. As soon as he can be left in our care, we will take over his recovery. I'm sure you have your own life to return to." Amaka forced a smile, acutely aware of her precarious position. She nodded, "I understand. I'm just glad he's safe and with family now." Yet a part of her ached, because she knew she had built a bond with Khalid, albeit one formed under a colossal lie. Aisha gave her an almost pitying look, then said, "We'll get you a guest room for tonight. We can figure out the next steps tomorrow." With that, she motioned to a servant to escort Amaka away. In the luxurious confines of the guest suite, Amaka was left alone to wrestle with her thoughts. Her phone buzzed intermittently with messages from her boutique manager, reminding her of her job responsibilities and inquiring about Khalid's condition. She replied with updates that were factual yet non-committal, then switched off her phone. The silence pressed down on her, her deception weighing heavily on her mind. She replayed the day's events: Khalid's amnesia, Aisha's suspicion, Hamza's guarded politeness, and the realization that she would likely be dismissed from this scenario soon. Logically, she told herself that leaving was the right thing to do. She had done her part by ensuring Khalid was not alone. But she also couldn't deny feeling a certain protectiveness over him, an urge to see him recover his memories. Before she drifted into a restless sleep, she resolved to come clean. Perhaps in the morning, she would quietly speak with Aisha and explain the entire story, how it all started with the delivery of a suit, how she felt compelled to stay when the doctor and hospital staff assumed she had a more significant connection, and how her words got tangled in the confusion. She would ensure that Khalid had everything he needed, then quietly exit his life. Yet destiny had other plans. By the next day, a new wave of complications would arise, pulling Amaka deeper into the mire of secrets, half-truths, and unexpected feelings. Before she knew it, leaving would no longer be a simple option. The sun's early rays gilded the mansion's sprawling lawns as Amaka awoke in a bed more luxurious than anything she had ever known. The soft sheets were worlds apart from her modest bedding back in Suralere. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to savor the comfort. Then the memories of her predicament rushed back: Khalid, still grappling with amnesia, and the entire Yunusa household eyeing her with curiosity or suspicion. She quickly dressed in the same clothes from the previous day. She had nothing else to wear, after all, and ventured downstairs, following the distant chatter and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The main lounge was a spacious area with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a sunlit garden. 2 large sofas framed a glass coffee table, upon which breakfast was laid out elegantly. Aisha sat there, flipping through a newspaper, while Hamza stood off to the side, his phone in one hand. The moment Amaka appeared, Aisha set down her newspaper and eyed her neutrally. "Good morning," Aisha said, her tone measured. "I trust you slept well?" Amaka nodded, a bit uncertain. "Thank you." Before anything more could be said, Khalid entered, dressed in casual slacks and a button-down shirt. He still appeared slightly fragile, but at least he was moving around on his own. His gaze immediately found Amaka, and a small smile touched his lips. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice tender. Aisha's watchful eyes flicked between them. "Khalid, dear, how are you feeling?" she asked, standing to guide him to a seat. She poured him a cup of tea. He sighed, massaging his temples. "A bit better, though there are still gaps in my head. I keep hoping to wake up and remember everything, but it's all cloudy." Then he turned to Amaka. "Thank you for staying." "I appreciate it." Amaka's cheeks warmed under his gratitude. She felt guilt pooling in her stomach again. She wanted to speak, to clarify her role, but Aisha cut in smoothly. "Yes, we do appreciate your help, Miss Amaka," she said, a hint of finality in her voice. "And we certainly don't intend to impose upon you any further." Reading between the lines, Amaka gathered her courage. "Ma, if you would allow me a moment, I'd like to speak with you privately about everything." She saw Khalid's brows arch, curiosity lighting his expression. Aisha nodded, and they stepped away to a smaller sitting area lined with books and ornate African art. Hamza hovered by the doorway, presumably out of earshot but ready to intervene if necessary. Aisha folded her arms, regarding Amaka expectantly. Amaka inhaled deeply. "I want you to know that I never intended to deceive anyone," she began, her voice trembling with sincerity. She recounted how she had found Khalid in the hotel suite, his collapse, and how the hospital had mistaken her for someone close to him. She admitted that she let the misunderstanding stand, though she conveniently omitted the specific moment she had claimed to be his wife. Instead, she framed it as a confusion that arose from the hospital staff's assumptions. Aisha listened silently, her face unreadable. When Amaka finished, she let the silence stretch for an uncomfortable moment. Finally, she spoke. "You say you were only trying to help. That's admirable. But Khalid's life is no playground. He's a man of considerable influence, wealth, and the name Yunusa is not one to be trifled with. If your intentions were less than honorable," she trailed off, her meaning clear. Amaka's shoulders sagged. "I understand, Ma. I have no ulterior motive. In fact, I'm more than ready to return to my normal life. I only stayed because Khalid seemed so lost." Aisha nodded thoughtfully. "You've proven yourself caring at least. And I see that Khalid trusts you for now. But he also needs professional care, and we have the resources for that." She paused, her gaze penetrating. "Given his confusion and how he clings to you, perhaps it's best if you remain for a short while, at least until a more suitable caretaker can step in without disrupting his fragile mental state. We'll have a private nurse and a therapist come to the house, but Khalid needs someone he believes he knows." Amaka was both stunned and relieved by this turn of events. She had expected to be dismissed, but Aisha was asking her to stay, albeit temporarily. With a grateful nod, she said, "I'll do my best to help him heal." "Good," Aisha responded briskly. "But understand that I will be monitoring this arrangement closely. One misstep, and I'll send you packing without hesitation." Amaka swallowed hard. "I understand." Thus began her official role in Khalid's home. She was given a modest allowance to buy appropriate clothes, as Aisha insisted she present herself neatly if she was to remain at Khalid's side. Amaka soon found herself seamlessly woven into the estate's daily rhythm. She accompanied Khalid to his doctor's appointments, served as his companion during therapy sessions, and even joined him at the dining table alongside Aisha. Over the following days, she discovered more about Khalid's world. Staff members moved about with clockwork efficiency. Some were friendly, others eyed her with barely concealed suspicion. The mansion was full of understated, tasteful luxury, grand piano in one corner, a private library stocked with rare volumes, and carefully curated African artworks that spoke to the family's cultural pride. One afternoon, as Khalid rested in his room, Amaka wandered the corridors to familiarize herself with the labyrinthine layout. She stumbled upon a locked door near the far end of the east wing. Intrigued, she tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. As she turned away, she noticed Hamza standing behind her, arms crossed. "Miss Amaka," he said quietly, "some areas of this house are off-limits." Heat flushed her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I was just—" He waved a hand dismissively. "I understand. But do be careful. This house can be complicated." Then, with a polite nod, he vanished down the hallway, leaving Amaka unsettled. She couldn't help but wonder what lay behind that locked door, and why Hamza seemed so guarded. Later, she found Khalid in the music room, absently running his fingers over the piano keys. "Do I know how to play?" he asked wistfully, pressing a random chord that resonated through the spacious room. "I'm not sure," she replied, feeling like an imposter. She wanted to help him connect with his past, but she had no clue which hobbies or passions had once defined him. Instead, she moved closer, gently placing her hand on his. "Maybe you can try learning again?" He smiled softly, an expression of gratitude that tugged at her heart. Despite the unspoken lie that overshadowed them, a warmth existed between them, an unspoken bond formed by his vulnerability and her desire to protect him. In fleeting moments like these, the charade almost felt secondary to the genuine concern she held for Khalid. But reality intruded in subtle ways. Aisha would schedule visits from their family lawyer, from corporate associates, all wanting to see Khalid or gather updates. Each visit was carefully orchestrated, with Aisha limiting any conversation that might overwhelm her nephew. She also kept Amaka on a short leash, always reminding her of her place, always watching her interactions with Khalid. One evening, Khalid admitted that fragments of memory had begun to resurface. He recalled a grand boardroom, a bustling city skyline seen through glass windows, and a name that lingered on the tip of his tongue, ABT Technologies. When he asked about it, Aisha explained it was one of his companies, but they decided not to push him too hard. Amaka's sense of foreboding grew. With each piece of memory that returned, the likelihood increased that Khalid would remember he did not have a wife named Amaka. She felt as though she stood on the edge of a precipice, every passing day bringing her one step closer to a revelation that could shatter the fragile trust Khalid had in her. In the dead of night, when she retreated to her lavish guest suite, she would stare at the ceiling, haunted by her initial deceit. Yet an equal measure of dread and longing filled her heart, dread for the inevitable day Khalid would unravel her lie, and longing for every extra moment she could spend by his side before that day arrived. Rain pattered softly against the glass walls of the Yunusa mansion, a refreshing respite from the usual sweltering Lagos heat. The sky was gray, casting shadows along the corridors. In this muted atmosphere, Khalid's therapy session took place in the study, a high-ceilinged room dominated by rows of encyclopedias, business manuals, and art books. Amaka hovered nearby, watching as Dr. Martins, the private therapist, gently coaxed Khalid into recollecting fragments of his life. Khalid spoke slowly, occasionally closing his eyes as if rummaging through a dark storehouse of memories. Every so often, he would shake his head in frustration. "It's all tangled up," he murmured, tapping his temple. Dr. Martins offered a reassuring smile. "This isn't uncommon. Amnesia can create confusion, especially if there's emotional trauma involved." During the session, Aisha lingered by the door, glancing at Amaka now and then. Amaka knew that the older woman still harbored doubts about her. Hamza occasionally peeked in, tapping away on his phone. The staff bustled about, preparing dinner, cleaning rooms, each with their own slice of curiosity about the so-called friend of Khalid who had taken up residence among them. After an hour, the session ended. Dr. Martins left, reminding them all that patience was key. Khalid sighed, leaning back in his armchair. He beckoned Amaka closer. "Would you like to walk in the garden?" he asked. She nodded, relieved for a moment alone with him. Aisha merely offered a curt nod of approval, letting them go. They stepped out onto the tiled veranda and descended into the manicured gardens. Despite the light rain, the warm breeze and the scent of wet earth made the stroll invigorating. They wandered along a stone pathway lined with hibiscus and bougainvillea. Khalid's gaze rested on a small koi pond. "Do you know if I ever fished here?" he asked, his voice tinged with longing. Amaka shook her head slowly. "I'm not sure. But it's beautiful. Maybe you did?" He nodded, reflecting on the possibility. Then, turning to Amaka, he asked a question that made her heart lurch. "Before my accident, were we close?" Swallowing hard, she mustered a careful response. "I was around," she said quietly. "But I don't think we truly knew each other well." It wasn't a lie, but it didn't illuminate the nature of her deception. Khalid's brows furrowed, and he reached out to gently hold her wrist. "I sense something between us," he said, searching her eyes. "You're always there when I look around. You're kind, thoughtful, and I can't help feeling that there's more to our connection than you're telling me." A surge of guilt and panic coursed through Amaka. She carefully extricated her hand from his. "I've just been worried about you," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. Her own emotions were tangled. She couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when Khalid smiled at her, nor the empathy she felt for this man who was lost in his own life. But the lie she had told, however well-intentioned, put a steel wall between them, one that would inevitably come crashing down. Their conversation was interrupted by Hamza's sudden appearance, holding an umbrella over his head. "Sir, there's an important matter that requires your attention," he said politely, though he eyed Amaka briefly before focusing on Khalid. "We've had a call from ABT Technologies." They need your input on a contract matter. Khalid glanced at Amaka, uncertainty clouding his features. But I don't remember anything about the company, he admitted softly. Hamza gave him a gentle, understanding smile. I can fill you in on the basics. Perhaps reviewing documents might jog your memory. Reluctantly, Khalid followed Hamza back into the mansion, leaving Amaka alone by the koi pond. She felt the gentle rain soak through her hair as she stared at the colorful fish darting beneath the water's surface. A swirl of emotions roiled inside her: concern for Khalid, fear of discovery, guilt for having kept him in the dark. It was at that moment she spotted Aisha standing on the veranda, partially concealed by a pillar. The older woman's gaze was on Amaka, and although her expression was unreadable, Amaka sensed that Aisha had been watching for some time. She offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of having witnessed the conversation. A chill ran down Amaka's spine that had nothing to do with the rain. That evening, an undercurrent of tension enveloped the house. Khalid was closeted with Hamza in the study, presumably going over business details. Aisha dined alone, not bothering to invite Amaka to join her, an unspoken statement of rank and suspicion. Amaka ended up eating a quick meal in the quiet comfort of her guest room before deciding to check on Khalid. She found him standing by the large window in the study, lights dimmed. Stacks of documents and a laptop rested on the mahogany desk. The tension in his posture told her he was overwhelmed. He glanced at her as she entered, relief flickering in his eyes. Everything's too complicated, he confessed, running a hand through his hair. These contracts, these figures, they're supposedly my decisions, but I don't remember any of it. Hamza was patient, but I can tell he expects more from me. Amaka approached, resting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Maybe just focus on what feels familiar, she suggested gently. Take it slowly. He inhaled, trying to steady himself. I'm supposed to be a powerful businessman, yet I feel like a child lost in the marketplace. He gave a self-deprecating chuckle. Perhaps you should make the decisions for me? She managed a small laugh, though her heart was heavy. I barely understand this world myself. I'm just here to support you, Khalid. He placed his hand over hers, a gesture of gratitude that made her pulse quicken. They stood there for a moment, the silence holding a comforting intimacy. The house was still, except for the distant hum of the air conditioning and the soft roll of thunder from the lingering storm outside. But the moment was shattered when footsteps approached. Hamza stepped in, offering a polite cough to announce his presence. He hesitated upon seeing their closeness, then cleared his throat. Sir, there's another call for you, someone from the board. They insist on speaking with you directly. A flicker of annoyance crossed Khalid's face. I'll be right there, he responded, stepping away from Amaka. Before leaving, he turned to her with an apologetic smile. Sorry. Alone with Hamza, Amaka felt suddenly self-conscious. She tried to retreat, but Hamza's voice stopped her. Miss Amaka? She turned to face him. I understand you want to be helpful, he began cautiously. But this situation is delicate. The more you allow him to depend on you, the harder it will be when he regains his memory. His words struck a chord of dread within her. She bristled slightly, uncertain how to respond. I'm only doing what I can to ease his discomfort. I have no ill intentions. Hamza studied her for a long moment, as though weighing her honesty. Finally he nodded. I hope so, he said simply, then left to attend to his duties. In the days that followed, Khalid immersed himself in his business dealings, aided by Hamza. Although he struggled, he managed to glean bits and pieces of familiarity. He recognized certain board members' names, remembered a few strategic initiatives, and slowly regained confidence. Through it all, he kept Amaka close, turning to her for emotional support. Aisha watched from the sidelines, her expression increasingly concerned. Sometimes, Amaka caught her whispering with Hamza, their gazes flicking over to her as they murmured in low tones. She could sense that a decision was brewing, something about how long they would let this arrangement continue. One afternoon, as Amaka stood outside Khalid's room waiting for him, a maid approached her shyly, pressing a small envelope into her hand. A friend left this for you at the gate, the maid said. Then, with a respectful bob, she disappeared. Amaka frowned, slipping into her guest room and tearing open the envelope. Inside was a short note from her boutique manager. Amaka, we need you back. Khalid's suits are important, but we can't hold your position indefinitely. Also, certain tabloids are asking questions about your relationship with him. Are you sure you're safe? Her heart pounded. The manager was right, her entire life was on hold, and a swirl of rumors was bound to arise if a simple sales assistant was seen living at a billionaire's mansion. She had to figure out her next move. That night, she tossed and turned in bed, replaying every moment of her duplicity. She recalled the vow she'd made to come clean once Khalid was safe. But now he was safe, albeit amnesic, yet she was still here, trapped by her own feelings, caught in a tangle of moral obligations and whispered doubts. When sleep finally came, it brought little comfort. She dreamed of standing at a crossroads, one path leading back to her simple life in Hstorytine and the other plunging her deeper into Khalid's opulent, mysterious world. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing her inner turmoil. By dawn, she would have to decide. Yet fate had a way of rendering one's decisions moot. The next day would bring a discovery so startling that it would tip the scales entirely, forcing Amaka into a confrontation she was nowhere near prepared for. Morning light spilled across the marble floors of the Yunusa estate, painting patterns of soft gold. Amaka rose early, determined to speak with Khalid, determined to tell him the truth, at least in part. She had rehearsed her words through the night, vowing to confess her initial lie while assuring him that she genuinely cared about his well-being. She wanted to free him from the webs of half-truths before his memory fully returned or, worse, before he found out from someone else. But as she made her way to Khalid's bedroom, she found it empty. A cautious inquiry to a passing maid revealed that Khalid was already up, presumably in the study or the lounge. Adjusting her outfit, a simple knee-length dress she had bought with the allowance Aisha provided, Amaka strode through the mansion's silent corridors in search of him. She found him not in the study, but in the east wing near that locked door she had tried before. He stood there, staring at the locked handle with a perplexed expression. Hamza was beside him, rummaging through a set of keys. Aisha hovered nearby, looking anxious. Khalid? Amaka asked softly, stepping forward. Is everything all right? He turned at the sound of her voice, a frown etched on his face. They told me there might be something behind this door that could help me remember, he said, his tone guarded. Aisha placed a hand on her nephew's shoulder. It's your father's old study, she explained, the corners of her mouth twitching into a sad half-smile. We never go in there much anymore, but perhaps seeing it could spark something in you. Hamza finally selected the correct key and inserted it into the lock. The door swung open, revealing a dust-covered room illuminated by shafts of sunlight filtering through heavy curtains. The scent of old books and stale air wafted out. Khalid stepped in first, followed by Aisha, Hamza, and a curious but hesitant Amaka. Inside, the walls were lined with bookshelves, their volumes sporting titles on African politics, economics, and history. A large mahogany desk dominated one corner. A table lamp, untouched for years, sat beside a framed photograph. Khalid approached the desk, carefully picking up the photo. It showed a younger version of himself, perhaps in his late teens, standing next to an older man with a dignified bearing, his father, presumably, and a regal-looking woman in a traditional northern Nigerian attire, possibly his late mother. Khalid's eyes brimmed with a mix of sorrow and wonder. I remember him, he whispered, his voice trembling. At least, I think I do. The memory seemed fleeting, like a whisper carried on the wind, but it was there. Aisha placed a comforting hand on his back. He set the photo down gently, turning to an old filing cabinet. He opened it and began thumbing through the contents, documents, old diaries, letters. His gaze fell upon a particular file, its edges worn from handling. Pulling it out, he flipped through the pages. Suddenly, his breath caught. Amaka, standing close, could see the top sheet's heading, Last Will and Testament. Her pulse quickened. She had no idea about the intricacies of Khalid's inheritance or the estate's affairs, but she sensed this document held substantial weight. Aisha stiffened slightly, while Hamza looked equally tense. Khalid skimmed the pages, confusion knitting his brow. I don't remember any of this, he muttered, scanning references to properties, stocks, philanthropic clauses. Then his gaze landed on something near the bottom. There's a codicil, he read aloud, stating that in the event I am married, certain shares and assets will be held jointly in trust for the family. And if I remain unmarried past the age of 35, his voice trailed off. He glanced up. I'm 32, right? Aisha cleared her throat. Yes, that's correct. This is an old stipulation. Your father was traditional in some aspects. He believed in continuing the family line. There was talk of an arranged match, but you never took to that idea. A wave of realization passed through Khalid. So, if I remain unmarried by 35, the bulk of the estate's assets pass to the family trust, meaning I'd lose a controlling share in some companies. Hamza stepped forward, speaking softly. It's more symbolic than anything. You're still in good financial standing, but yes, controlling shares might shift if you don't fulfill that marital clause. Khalid studied their expressions, then turned to Amaka. Did I have any fiancé, or was I planning on getting married? He asked, his voice laced with frustration at his own ignorance. Aisha and Hamza looked at one another, and an awkward silence enveloped the room. Amaka felt her heart race, aware this was no trivial matter. Whatever the family might say, the fact that she had been lying about being Khalid's wife could be perceived in an entirely new, opportunistic light if discovered. Aisha finally spoke, choosing her words carefully. You've had close companions. But there was no formal engagement. None that we approved of, at least. Her gaze shifted subtly toward Amaka, as if her presence exemplified Khalid's unpredictable choices. Suddenly, Khalid dropped the file on the desk and turned to Amaka, a wild glint in his eye. Wait, when I woke up, they said you were the one by my side. You were the one the hospital staff assumed was my wife. Aisha and Hamza froze, but Khalid ignored them, focusing on Amaka. Is there something I'm missing? Were we? His voice was urgent, searching. Amaka's mouth went dry. This was the precise moment she had dreaded. She swallowed. Khalid, it wasn't, we're not. She grappled for the right words to untangle the lie. I was mistaken for your wife at the hospital because I was there when they brought you in. But we're not actually. A flash of confusion and pain crossed his face. But you stayed. All this time, you stayed by me. I assumed there was a reason you never contradicted them. She felt the weight of Aisha and Hamza's stares. The air crackled with tension. Finally, she forced herself to speak, voice quivering with emotion. I was worried about you. I made a terrible mistake by not correcting them. I never meant to deceive you or your family. It just snowballed, and I was afraid you'd have no one to turn to in your condition. Aisha's face was pinched in anger and betrayal, while Hamza's lips pressed into a thin line. But Khalid's reaction was the one that stung the most. He stepped back as if physically recoiling from her presence. His eyes darkened, a swirl of hurt and betrayal within them. So it was all a lie, he whispered. Tears sprang to Amaka's eyes. I'm sorry, she choked. I never wanted to hurt you. I truly care for your well-being. His fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment, it looked like he might lash out. Then he turned away abruptly, facing the dust-laden shelves. I need to think, he said, his voice trembling. All of you, just go. Aisha exhaled sharply, grabbing Amaka by the arm and pulling her toward the door. Hamza followed, quietly closing it behind them. In the corridor, Aisha spun on Amaka, fury etched into her features. How dare you, she hissed, voice low. You come into our home under false pretenses, lie to a man who has lost his memory, and manipulate his emotions? Do you realize what this could mean? Amaka's tears spilled over. She shook her head, shoulders slumping under the weight of remorse. I'm sorry, she repeated. I didn't do it for money or any advantage. I just wanted him to be safe. Aisha scoffed. Safe? Or under your control? You think we don't know what gold diggers look like? Hamza placed a hand on Aisha's shoulder, trying to calm her. Let's not jump to conclusions. But it's clear she must leave. We should arrange a security detail to escort her out immediately. Amaka's heart pounded. She had dreaded this moment, but she knew it was inevitable. "I'll pack my things," she murmured, voice trembling. "I'm sorry for everything." Within an hour she was back in her guest suite, tossing her meager belongings into a small bag. The staff watched with a mixture of curiosity and pity, well aware that some scandal had erupted. Once ready, she walked through the grand foyer one last time. Memories of her time here, of the worry for Khalid, the stolen moments of warmth, flashed through her mind. Guilt and sorrow mingled, forming a heavy knot in her stomach. Aisha and Hamza stood by the main doors, the formalities of politeness absent from their faces. A driver waited by a car, engine idling. As Amaka stepped outside into the scorching late-morning sun, she wondered if Khalid would come to see her off, or if he was too hurt to face her. She waited a moment, but only the quiet drone of a distant lawnmower broke the silence. A stab of heartbreak cut through her as she realized this was truly the end. She climbed into the car and was driven away from the Yunusa mansion, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Her mind swirled with unanswered questions. Would Khalid ever forgive her? Would his memory return fully, and if so, would he despise her for her deception? She closed her eyes, recalling the day she first found him collapsed on that hotel floor. If she had only been honest from the start. Back in Hstorytine, the noisy chaos of everyday life felt both familiar and jarring. The driver dropped her off near her apartment, saying nothing. Standing in front of the chipped paint of her building, Amaka felt a profound sense of displacement. She had left the mansion behind, a world of opulence, secrets, and budding emotions. Now she was back to her old reality, but nothing felt the same. She spent the next hours staring at the sparse furnishings of her tiny apartment, haunted by regret. The following day, she forced herself to resume work at the boutique, ignoring the inquisitive looks from colleagues who had caught wind of rumors linking her to the hospitalized billionaire. She wanted to bury the entire episode, to fold it into the past where it belonged. But fate had another twist in store. Late in the evening, just as she was locking up the boutique, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She almost ignored it, but a tug of curiosity made her answer. It was an unknown number. The voice on the other end was hesitant and strained. Amaka? She recognized it immediately, her heart lurching into her throat. Khalid. She barely breathed his name, shock thrumming through her. He hesitated. "I want to talk. Please." For a moment, tears blurred her vision. She didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. Had he remembered more? Had he called to chastise her once again or to cut off ties permanently? Her grip on the phone tightened. "Where are you?" she asked, voice trembling. His answer was hushed, almost secretive. "I'm at the White Orchid Lounge in Victoria Island. I came here alone. I just needed some space." He paused, and in the background, she could hear the distant chatter of bar patrons. "Will you come?" Amaka closed her eyes, a swirl of emotions crashing over her, regret, longing, hope. She didn't know what awaited her at that lounge, but she could not deny the yearning in her heart to see him again, to face the consequences of her lie. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll come." She ended the call, exhaling a shaky breath. Stepping out into the humid Lagos night, she flagged down a kiki. As she settled onto the seat, the city's bright lights reflecting in her tearful eyes, she realized that her journey with Khalid was far from over. Their paths, woven together by fate and deception, were about to converge once more, this time, with the truth laid bare and the promise of a future neither could have predicted. And so she rode off into the neon glow of Victoria Island, uncertain of what awaited her but determined to face it, heart-pounding, hopes and fears colliding beneath the Nigerian night sky. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.